All right, so moving right along. So like I said before, right, everything has an input and everything also has an output. Well, not everything, but most of everything has an output. So what we have here is two different options of what we can actually output. So we've got C for cells, sorry, and then P for the points. So, excuse me. So notice that there's a major difference here, right? And this is where we start getting into something that's actually programming based. Okay, so what you see here in the input, right? You have, and everything that we've done so far, I don't know if you got into lists or anything with Jeff, but everything that we've done so far, you guys with me, has been with one value, right? Either one plane or one geometry, maybe two, I don't know. And then this one in particular is 8 because I set the slider to 8. But now, if I hover over the cells, it says 24 locally defined values. So those 24 values are set up in, well, I won't go there yet. I'll talk about that later. So anyway, so you have 24 values for that one. And then for the points, it's a little bit more confusing because you actually have 36. So what you should know about these lists is that the information that's being passed through actually comes through in a family of sorts, right? So there are sets, and this is all programming terminology, but sets and lists. So sets are small packages of information that are included in lists. And so it follows a very similar structure as, you know, something like this, where, you know, if you list out a whole bunch of files, it's kind of like a file structure. Your list is all of these folders, and each set is a folder full of folders, or files, or whatever it is, right? So micro RS4 is the 1, 2, 3, third set in the list. You don't have to worry too much about that. I'm just trying to give you background information. You won't be tested on it, and it's not really something you have to have practical knowledge. Just in the back of your mind, you got to kind of know how it works. But what gets confusing here is that programmers, they didn't really prepare for the everyday user to start getting into programming. So when it comes to establishing a list, they very cleverly started all their lists with the number 0. So when you think about the third item in a list, it's actually the second index. So that's the 0 index, 1 index, and 2 index. That's your third item in a list. You'll get practice on that. I'm foreshadowing. So anyway, the other thing that you need to know here and pay attention to is this n equals 3. So n equals 3 basically means that information that's being repeated is being repeated particularly 3 times. So we have a group of 8 cells, right? So 8 cells are being passed through in the x direction, right? So x is always primary. Notice how, you know, when I do this, the x is the positive, and then the the y is the positive here, and then this is x is positive, and then y is negative, right? There's an order to these things. So when I pass through 8 cells in the x direction, right? 8. Then I pass through all 8 of those cells 1, 2, 3 times in the y direction. So that's what's happening here. This is 1, even though it says 0, all the way down to 7, which is actually 8, being passed through 3 times. There are 3 copies of those 8 items in the list. Does that make sense? Yes. Yes.
So the number depends on the extent y, then if you change that, the n will change too.
That's true. Well, it depends on both. You know, so if he asked, every number depends on the extent y. It depends on both, right? So if I change the 8 value down to 6, well then now I've got, 6 times 3 is 18. So I still have my 3 groups of 3, right? So all the individual ones are packaged up in groups of 3, and it goes vertically. So I'm going to do something real quick so you can visually see what's happening, but don't worry about following along just yet. I just want you to see it. So I'm going to jump down here into display, and I'm going to display a point list. And let's see here. Okay. All right. So you don't need to build this right now. So I'm just going to group it and put it up top. But basically, the information that's coming out of here, right? That's what you're seeing. So your set, your 0 set in the list has 8 cells, or well now 6 cells in it. And then your 1 set has 6, and your 2 set has 6. So those will change. Anytime I want to add more, it'll change as well. Okay, so the best way I can describe this is that is not, the way that you're counting these is not a law. It's not the only way that you can count this sort of thing. It's a convention. It's an invention by people that have developed logic and reasoning in a digital world. So it can be manipulated. You can read it in different ways. So I want to introduce you to something that we're going to use in the near future, but not quite yet. But it's one of the most important things that you have to be aware of as you begin to really, truly understand this software, and that's the idea of flattening a list. Okay? So that term is very, very important. I'll write it on the board, actually. Not that you need to write it down, but you should just see it a lot, because you're going to see it a lot more. Flatten. So let me do this. You don't have to do this yet either, but I want to show you what this looks like. So under params and input, if you're ever interested in seeing how the information is really being displayed, you can drop in a panel. It's this little yellow one right there. You don't have to do it now, but it's useful to know. I drop a lot of these in to show you the information that's being passed through. Okay, so under param and input, this panel will show you the format that the information is being processed. So this essentially is your list. And these packages are your sets. Making sense? Now that you can see it? And so if you look at where the cells are, right, there's a rectangle that's 5 by 5. And so there's 6 of them. So the idea of flattening, right, that whole numerical system is now going to change. And it's very, very simple. And you can do it either on the output or on the input side. But basically, you right-click on the output value, I guess you would call it. And you do this thing right here. It's called flatten. So now look at it. So not only does it now count everything in a linear fashion up to an exact number of cells that there are, but it also seemingly, and I say seemingly, changed the direction that it counted. So now it's going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going up instead of X. So why do you think that is? No clue? It's because, excuse me, because when it counts a cell, it counts it in a particular direction in terms of defining its boundary. So wherever it closes the boundary on the fourth point, that starts the next cell. So it goes around this way. Okay? So now I'll show you how that looks in terms of the actual point values, but it's going to get messy. So I need to turn this down a little bit, like that. So I'm going to turn that off and then disconnect these. You know how to disconnect? Did he show you that yet? Okay. So you can disconnect all those. And now I'm going to actually look at the points, right? So the points are coming out in packages of 7. And notice here in this list, it's showing you the x, y, and z value of all those points. That's not new to you, right? You understand what that looks like? Okay. So those points are coming out. Also, I didn't explain this either, and forgive me for kind of like monologuing for so long. There's a lot of background information you need to understand before we actually do anything. But we're getting there. So anyway, this wire, and these are called wires, this wire is dashed. And it's dashed, in my opinion, I don't know if it's actually programmed to be this way, but it's dashed because it kind of looks like little groups of information are going through, right? So it's sets of information that are being passed along versus one continuous list. So when I flatten that now, it's a solid line. So that's a flattened line. The other one is a, I forget. I think grafted is technically the invert. Don't worry about it. Just worry about flatten. So we've got all these different points, right? And if I plug them into this now, that. What you notice is that the points are being read 0, 0, 0, 0 all the way across. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, so on and so forth. But if I flatten that now, it goes up, right? So it's following the same kind of sequence where it goes back around to here and then it continues it all the way up, right? So it'll go around. But what was I getting at? Oh, yes. So the cells, yeah. Oh, time? Oh, thank you very much. So I'll stop at that then, now that we're just looking at the grid itself, right? So the grid has a particular behavior, but when we start to actually create things with the grid, it behaves a little bit differently. Okay, so I'll stop there. That's good timing. Thank you.